The sound of my own daughter's hand cracking across my cheek rang louder than any siren I ever rode behind in 28 years, driving a city bus through the worst blocks of Memphis. I did not raise my voice. I did not raise my hand back. I just stood there in my own kitchen, tasting blood on the inside of my lip, while my son-in-law leaned against the refrigerator with his arms crossed, watching like it was a show he'd already seen the ending to. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought a little fear would make an old man sign away the only thing he had left, but they made a mistake. You don't intimidate a man who spent 3 decades navigating through gunfire, riots, and floodwaters just to get strangers home safe. The next morning, I didn't call my pastor. I didn't call a lawyer. I went into the kitchen before sunrise, and I cooked the biggest breakfast my daughter Renee had eaten in years. When she walked in rubbing sleep from her eyes, she smiled, thinking the old man had finally learned his place. She had no idea that the woman sitting at my table, sipping coffee from my late wife's favorite cup, was about to unravel everything Renee and her husband had spent 6 months building on lies. Before I tell you exactly how that breakfast became a verdict, tell me, family, where are you tuning in from this morning? Drop your city below. And if you believe respect is earned through years, not demanded through threats, hit that like button and subscribe, because there's a lot more truth where this came from. My name is Walter Combs, but most folks on the Orange Mound side of Memphis just call me Mr. Walt. I'm 68 years old, and my knuckles are swollen from 40 years of gripping a steering wheel through ice storms, summer heat that melted the asphalt, and nights when I picked up exhausted nurses getting off 3rd shift and made sure they got home safe even after my route was supposed to end. I built my whole life on 3 things: showing up, telling the truth, and taking care of my own. But that Thursday evening, standing in the kitchen I had repainted with my own 2 hands the year my wife Dorothy passed, I understood I was trying to hold together a family that had already rotted from the inside. The air in that room felt like it did right before a summer storm, thick and waiting to break. My daughter Renee was 39 years old, pacing across my linoleum floor like the walls themselves owed her something. She used to be soft-spoken, the kind of girl who cried when she stepped on an ant. But standing in my kitchen that night, she looked like a stranger wearing my daughter's face. Her husband, Marcus, sat at my table with his phone in his hand, not even bothering to look up, scrolling like none of this concerned him, even though he was the one who'd put the idea in her head. "Daddy, you're not even listening to me," Renee snapped, her voice cracking up an octave. "This isn't a scam. It's a real opportunity. Marcus's cousin runs the whole operation. People are doubling their money in 90 days. I just need you to put the house up as collateral. $60,000, Daddy. That's it. We'll pay off everything you owe within the year." I leaned back against my counter and folded my arms over my chest. "I don't owe anything, Renee," I said, keeping my voice level. "God, this house has been paid off for 11 years. I bought it with double shifts and Christmases I missed watching other people's families instead of mine. I'm not putting my roof up as a bet on somebody's cousin." Marcus finally looked up from his phone, his jaw tight. "See, this is exactly the problem, Walt. You think because you drove a bus for 30 years that makes you some kind of financial expert. This is a different world now. People your age don't understand digital assets." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I recognized the tone. I'd heard that same tone from men trying to sell me extended warranties, from men trying to sell me timeshares in Branson, from every smiling stranger who thought gray hair meant a slow mind. "Funny," I said, "because I remember when you were trying to sell timeshares door to door 3 years back, Marcus. How'd that work out for you and those folks in Tunica?" His face went tight. Renee's eyes darted between us. "Daddy, please, don't bring up old stuff. This is different." "It's always different," I said softly. "Right up until it isn't." That's when Renee did something I never thought my daughter capable of. She crossed the kitchen in 3 quick steps and slapped me across the face so hard my ear rang. The room went dead silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. Marcus didn't move. He didn't gasp. He just sat there, watching, like he'd been waiting for her to finally do it. I didn't touch my cheek. I didn't cry out. I just looked at my daughter. The same girl I taught to ride a bike on Saturday mornings down Bellevue. The same girl whose hand I held in the hospital the night her mother died. And I saw something behind her eyes, That wasn't rage. It was fear. Fear of a debt she hadn't told me about yet. You don't get to talk down to us anymore, old man, Marcus said, finally standing, his voice low and cold. You're going to sign those papers, or things are going to get a lot harder for you around here. I picked a piece of cornbread off the counter, where it had fallen during the commotion. I took a bite. It was still warm. I built this house with my hands, I said. I'll decide what happens to it. Then I walked past both of them and went to bed, leaving the kitchen light on, leaving the silence behind me, like a fuse already lit. They thought the fight was over. They had no idea I'd already started digging. The war didn't begin with shouting. It began with quiet. The next morning, Marcus cut the cable line running to my room, claiming it was for my own good, that watching too much news was making me anxious and confused. 2 days later, my cell phone disappeared from the kitchen counter while I was in the shower. When I asked Renee about it, she wouldn't meet my eyes. We just think you need less stress right now, Daddy. Marcus is handling things. What they didn't know was that I had a flip phone hidden inside my old toolbox in the garage, the same toolbox Dorothy used to tease me about because I never threw anything away. And I had something else they didn't know about. 41 years ago, back when I was a young man with more pride than sense, I'd made a friend on my route, a quiet woman named Geraldine Price, who rode my bus every single morning to her job downtown. We talked for years about everything and nothing. She went on to become a probate attorney, one of the sharpest in Shelby County, and she never forgot the bus driver who used to wait an extra 30 seconds if he saw her running for the stop. When Dorothy passed, Geraldine was the one who helped me set up a living trust, quiet and clean, naming my granddaughter Aaliyah as the sole beneficiary should anything ever happen to me, with explicit protections against exactly the kind of pressure I now felt closing in around me. I hadn't told Renee about the trust, not because I didn't trust my daughter once. I had. But 3 months earlier, Aaliyah, my 17-year-old granddaughter who'd been living with me since her parents' marriage started falling apart, had come to me crying, telling me she'd overheard her mother and Marcus talking about what happens to Grandpa's house like I was already gone. I didn't believe it then. I believed it now. The enemy didn't come through the front door with a battering ram. He came wearing a cheap gray suit and carrying a leather folder, smelling like spearmint gum and motor oil. His name was Dr. Felton, though I never once saw a medical license, and Renee introduced him as a specialist Marcus knows who could evaluate me. They cornered me in my own living room on a Sunday afternoon, while Aaliyah was supposedly at church youth group, though I later learned she'd snuck back early and was sitting on the stairs the whole time. Phone in hand, recording every word. Daddy, Renee said, her voice syrupy and rehearsed, we're just worried about you. The way you've been forgetting things, getting confused about the bills, getting agitated. Dr. Felton just wants to ask you a few questions. The man sat across from me, opened his folder, and asked if I knew what day of the week it was. I looked him dead in his eyes. It's Sunday, I said clearly, and I know exactly who I am. I'm Walter Combs. I own this house outright, and I know a con man when I smell one, and you smell like a Texaco station. Felton sighed theatrically and looked at Renee, shaking his head like a disappointed schoolteacher. Paranoia, hostility, accusing strangers without cause. These are early markers of cognitive decline, Mrs. Webb. I'd recommend a course of sedatives to manage his agitation while we monitor him further. He pulled out a prescription pad and scribbled something. Handing a small bottle to Renee like he was passing her a sacrament. I'd spent 30 years pulling overdose victims off my bus and waiting with them for paramedics. I knew the smell of real medicine, and the smell of something meant to put a man down and keep him there. When Renee handed me 2 white pills and a glass of water that night, I took them without protest. I let the water hit my throat. I let my head fall back. Then, while she turned to set the glass down, I tucked both pills into my cheek, a trick I'd learned from an old Army veteran who used to ride my route every Tuesday and tell me stories about basic training. I had a ficus tree in the corner of my living room, the one Dorothy babied for 15 years, the one I kept watered every single week, like a promise. God forgive me, but I buried those pills deep in that soil that night, and I did it again the next night, and the next. By that Saturday, The leaves had gone the color of old newspaper. By Sunday, the plant was dead, brittle, curling in on itself. Whatever was in those pills was strong enough to kill something living in 4 days. If I'd swallowed them like they wanted, I wouldn't have been pretending to be slow. I would have actually been gone. But I had to sell it. I had to let them believe the lie was working. Over the following 2 weeks, I let myself fade in front of them. I sat in Dorothy's old recliner with my head tilted, my mouth slack, my eyes half closed, while inside I tracked every word, every footstep, every whispered phone call. Aaliyah became my eyes and ears when I couldn't move freely. She'd come sit near me after school, pretending to do homework, while actually listening to Renee and Marcus argue in the next room about money they'd already lost. The crypto thing tanked. I heard Marcus hiss one evening, thinking I was asleep in the chair. "We're underwater 40 grand, Renee. I need real collateral. The house. Or that land your father's always talking about, the lot out by Pickwick Lake." My heart nearly stopped, though I kept my breathing slow and even. That land was the only thing I owned, separate from the house. 4 acres on the water I'd bought back in 1998, dreaming of building Dorothy a cabin one day. After she passed, I held on to it for Aaliyah, the one piece of this world I hadn't let them anywhere near. 2 nights later, Marcus knelt in front of my chair holding a folded document and a pen. "Pop," he said, using a name he'd never once called me in 9 years of marriage to my daughter, "I just need your signature right here. It's for insurance purposes. Making sure everything's protected." I let my eyes drift past him, unfocused, humming a low, tuneless note the way Dorothy used to hum when she was tired. I let the pen rest loosely between my fingers, then let it slip and roll off the paper, scratching a meaningless line across the page. Marcus cursed under his breath. He looked toward the hallway to make sure Renee wasn't watching. Then he took the pen himself, hunched over that quitclaim deed, and forged my signature with a careful little flourish on the W, the same flourish I'd taught Aaliyah to write when she was 8 years old, practicing her own name. He didn't know she was standing just past the doorway, phone raised, capturing every second. A week later, they told me I was going on a little trip to a place called Magnolia Gardens, a wellness community out past the interstate. I knew exactly what that place was. I'd driven my bus past it for years, picking up exhausted aides coming off 12-hour shifts who told me stories that would curl your hair, about residents left in soiled beds for hours, about call buttons that nobody answered. Marcus wasn't taking me to a retreat. He was taking me to a place to disappear. Aaliyah stood on the porch as they walked me to Marcus's car, her arms wrapped around herself, tears welling in her eyes. She thought, in that moment, she was watching her grandfather get carried away for good. Marcus tried to steer me past her quickly, but I planted my feet and pulled my arm free. I reached out and cupped her face in both my hands, the same hands that used to lift her onto my shoulders at the Cooper Young Festival every fall. "You stay strong, baby girl," I said loud enough for Marcus to hear, frail and confused on the surface. Then I leaned in close, my voice dropping to something only she could catch. "Call Miss Geraldine. Tell her it's time." Her eyes went wide for half a second, and then I saw something steady itself behind them. She gave the smallest nod in the world. I winked at her, the same wink I used to give when I'd sneak her an extra scoop of ice cream Dorothy said she couldn't have, and then I let Marcus guide me to the car. As we pulled out of the driveway, I watched my house shrink in the side mirror. The crepe myrtle I'd planted for Dorothy the spring she got sick was blooming pink against the brick. The porch swing I'd hung the year Renee was born still moved gently in the wind. A weaker man might have broken right there. But I looked at that house the way I used to look at a fire scene before the trucks arrived, assessing, not mourning. I wasn't surrendering. I was drawing them out into the open. Magnolia Gardens smelled exactly like I expected, bleach fighting a losing battle against something worse underneath it. A tired nurse with kind eyes but no time pointed me toward a room at the end of a hallway lit by buzzing fluorescent tubes. "Bed 3, she said, not even glancing at my face. "Policy is we hold personal items at intake." I spent 11 days in that place playing the role of my life, slumped in a wheelchair during meals, mumbling half sentences to orderlies, letting my head loll while Marcus visited twice, performing concern for the benefit of the staff, loud enough for other families to hear. What none of them knew was that Geraldine Price had been busy the entire time. The trust I'd set up years earlier had ironclad language requiring 2 independent medical evaluations and a court hearing before any guardianship could be approved. Language Geraldine had insisted on specifically because she'd seen too many families in Shelby County do exactly what mine was attempting. When Marcus filed the paperwork to formally have me declared incompetent, using Dr. Felton's fraudulent evaluation, the trust's automatic triggers locked every account associated with my estate and flagged the petition for review by the court. Marcus walked into Renee's bank branch 3 days later, expecting to access funds against the Pickwick land using the forged deed. Instead, the branch manager, a steady older woman named Miss Odessa Pratt, who'd known me for 15 years from my route stop near her branch, looked at that deed and looked at Marcus and said the signature didn't match anything on file. I'd also like to mention, she added, sliding a card across the counter, that we're required to report suspected elder financial exploitation. I think you should speak to an attorney before you say anything else. Marcus didn't wait around to hear more. He left that branch like the building was on fire, and from what Geraldine later told me, he sat in his car in that parking lot for almost 20 minutes before he could even start the engine. That night, back at the house, Aaliyah filmed the whole thing from the top of the stairs, just like I'd taught her without ever quite saying it out loud. Marcus burst through the front door, soaked from the rain, his suit ruined, his eyes wild. Renee was on the couch, scrolling her phone, oblivious. "Where's the deposit confirmation?" she asked, not even looking up. "Did it clear?" "There is no deposit," Marcus said, his voice cracking. "It's gone, Renee. The whole thing's frozen. They know about the signature." Renee's face went pale. "What signature? Marcus, what did you do?" "I did it for us," he shouted. "I did it because you said your father was never going to give it up the right way. I forged it because you told me he was getting confused anyway, that it wouldn't even matter." Renee stood up slowly, and Aaliyah told me later that something in her mother's face cracked open in that moment, like she was seeing her own husband clearly for the very first time. "I never told you to forge anything," Renee said, her voice shaking. "I told you to talk to him. I never told you to commit a crime, Marcus." "You knew," he snapped. "You knew exactly what I was doing, and you let me do it because you wanted the money just as bad as I did." The truth, the whole rotten shape of it, was finally sitting in that living room with them, and there was nowhere left for either of them to hide from it. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning, in a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and old paper. I sat beside Geraldine, in a gray suit I hadn't worn since Dorothy's funeral, my cane resting against my knee, my mind sharp as it had been every day of my life. Marcus sat beside his own lawyer, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Renee sat 2 seats down from him, not beside him, a small distance that told its own story. Geraldine stood and laid out the evidence with the same calm precision she'd shown riding my bus home from work for years, never raising her voice, never needing to. She presented the forensic handwriting analysis, showing my actual signature didn't match the one on the deed. She presented the timestamp log showing the document had been uploaded from Marcus's laptop from inside my own house at 11 at night. She presented Dr. Felton's actual employment record, which showed no medical license currently active in the state of Tennessee, only a lapsed one revoked 4 years earlier following a separate complaint. The judge, a woman with steel gray hair and a voice like a closing door, looked at Marcus for a long moment. "Mr. Webb," she said, "you orchestrated a fraudulent medical evaluation, attempted to forge a legal document, and arranged for your father-in-law's involuntary placement in a care facility, all while he was, by every account in this courtroom, fully competent. This isn't a guardianship dispute. This is elder abuse and fraud." She turned to the bailiff. "I want the district attorney's office contacted before anyone leaves this room." Marcus's lawyer tried to object, tried to suggest his client had been misled, but the judge wasn't having it. "Petition for guardianship denied with prejudice," she said, bringing the gavel down. "And Mr. Webb, I'd advise you to retain criminal counsel separate from this proceeding." I watched my son-in-law's shoulders fold inward like something had finally collapsed inside him. Two officers approached, and he didn't resist when they cuffed his hands behind his back. As they walked him toward the side door, he turned and called out, "Pop, please, you have to understand. I never meant for it to go this far." I stood slowly, leaning on my cane, and I looked at him without flinching. "I understand exactly how far you meant to go," I said. "That's why I let it play all the way out." The door closed behind him, and the room went quiet in a way that didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt like a held breath, finally being let go. Renee didn't go to jail. The prosecutor determined she hadn't directly committed fraud, though her knowledge and silence weren't without consequence. The court ordered her into financial counseling and mandated supervised visitation with Aaliyah for a probationary period, since Aaliyah herself had requested to remain in my custody, a request the judge granted without hesitation given everything that had come to light. Renee sat outside the courthouse afterward on a concrete bench, and when I walked past her, she looked up with eyes I hadn't seen since she was a little girl, scared and ashamed all at once. "Daddy," she said quietly, "I didn't think it would go that far. I swear I didn't." I stopped, but I didn't sit down beside her. "You let a man put his hands on your own father, Renee, and you never said a word against it that night. Marcus didn't make you stay quiet. You chose that, same as he chose to forge my name. I let that settle in the space between us. I'm not finished being your father, but I'm done pretending silence is the same thing as love. When you're ready to actually be in this family again, the door's open. Until then, I need you to give your daughter and me some room to heal." I left her there on that bench, not out of cruelty, but because some lessons only take root in the quiet. A person is forced to sit in alone. The house didn't feel like mine anymore after all of it. Every room held a shadow of something broken. The kitchen, where my own daughter's hand had struck my face. The living room, where a fake doctor had tried to convince the world I was losing my mind. The hallway where my granddaughter had stood filming the unraveling of her own family just to save me. I put the house on the market in the spring. A young couple with 2 little boys bought it within 3 weeks, and watching them walk the backyard talking about a swing set, I felt something in my chest finally loosen. I used the proceeds from the house, along with the Pickwick land Marcus had tried to steal, the very acreage I dreamed of for Dorothy decades earlier, and I built something small and simple on that lakefront, instead of letting the dream die with the betrayal attached to it. A modest cabin with wide windows facing the water, a porch deep enough for 2 rocking chairs, and a dock where the morning mist rolled off the lake just like I'd always pictured it. Aaliyah moved in with me full-time that fall, finishing her senior year of high school at a new school near the lake, and some evenings we'd sit out on that dock with fishing poles we barely used, just talking, just being quiet together in a way that didn't carry any fear in it. She told me once that she didn't regret a single second of what we'd done, not the recording, not the lying to her own mother's face about what she knew. "We protected you, Grandpa," she said. "That's not something to regret." 6 months after the hearing, on an ordinary Tuesday evening, with the sun dipping orange behind the trees, Aaliyah's phone buzzed on the dock between us. She'd been waiting on a college decision for weeks, applying to nursing programs after watching, in her words, what real strength actually looks like during everything we'd survived together. She picked up the phone with shaking hands, and when she read the screen, she dropped it onto the wood planks and turned to me with tears streaming down her face. Except these tears were nothing like the ones I'd seen on that porch the day they took me away. "Grandpa," she whispered, "I got into the nursing program. Full scholarship. Meharry Medical College. I set my fishing rod down slow and careful, the way you set down something you don't want to break. I thought about Dorothy, about the nights she worked double shifts at the hospital just to put braces on Renee's teeth, about every quiet sacrifice that gets buried and forgotten until a moment like this, one, cracks it back open. I looked at my granddaughter, the girl who'd hidden on a staircase recording her own family's betrayal just to save an old man who used to drive a city bus. And I understood that she wasn't just my granddaughter anymore. She was the proof that everything I'd endured had been worth it. "You did this," I said, pulling her into a hug, her face pressed against my shoulder. "No, Grandpa," she said, muffled against my shirt. "We did this." I stood there on that dock, as the stars started coming out one by one over Pickwick Lake, the water dark and calm, and I felt something in my chest that had been clenched tight for almost a year, finally let go completely. We don't always get to choose the family we're born into, but I've learned, after 68 years on this earth, that we absolutely get to choose who stays close enough to call family. Loyalty isn't blood. Loyalty is who shows up, who tells the truth even when it costs them something, and who protects you when protecting you is the harder, lonelier road. My daughter taught me that silence can be its own kind of betrayal. My granddaughter taught me that courage doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks like a 17-year-old girl sitting quietly on a staircase, recording the truth, waiting for the exact right moment to let it speak for itself. Thank you for sitting with me through this one, family. If you've ever had to make a hard choice to protect your own peace, even when it meant pruning your own family tree, I want to hear about it down in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from tonight, and if you believe a man's dignity is worth fighting for at any age, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close, because there are a lot more stories like this one still waiting to be told. I'll see you in the next one. Real strength isn't always loud or fast. Sometimes love means staying patient enough to let the truth show itself in its own time. Walter never stopped believing his granddaughter's quiet courage mattered, and that faith became the foundation for both their healing. Family can disappoint us, but it can also surprise us with grace, and choosing who shows up for you again and again is its own kind of homecoming worth celebrating. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to share a genuine, heartfelt life lesson along the way.